Hello, my name is Annie. I am going to be presenting the Vietnam War. It started with the Indochina War around 1945 to 1954, but today we'll be covering the U.S. involvement, which was from 1955 to 1973. So, Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a Vietnamese revolutionary leader and the founding father of modern Vietnam. He led the struggle for independence from the French colonial rule and later against the American involvement during the Vietnam War. He was the leader of the Viet Minh and later became the president and prime minister of North Vietnam. He was committed to the Communist Party but also a nationalist who sought Vietnamese independence for all. This letter to President Truman by Ho Chi Minh reads, "To the President of the United States of America, Washington, D.C. On behalf of Vietnam government and people, I beg to inform you that in course of our conversations between Vietnam government and French representative, the latter requires the secession of Indochina and the return of French troops in Hanoi. Stop. Meanwhile, French population and troops are making active preparations for a coup de main in Hanoi and for military aggression. Stop. I therefore most earnestly appeal to you personally and the American people to interfere urgently in support of our independence and help making the negotiations more in keeping the principles of the Atlantic and San Francisco charters." The letter symbolizes an opportunity for the U.S.-Vietnam cooperation. It showed Ho's initial willingness to work with the United States, but its rejection contributed to the Vietnam turning more fully toward the Soviet Union and China for support in its struggle. It marked an early point in the war that eventually led to the conflict between the U.S. and Vietnam government. So this picture depicts the young guerrillas of the Viet Minh that wore grenades at their belts, preparing to fight encroaching Viet Minh forces in the Red River and Delta. This diagram here shows the different flags and parties involved in the Vietnam War. The United States entered the war to stop the spread of the communism in Asia. The Viet Cong was a communist group in South Vietnam that supported the North's goal of reunification. They used guerrilla tactics and had significant support from the populations of the South. North Vietnam was led by Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party that aimed to unify the country under a communist rule. They were supported by the Soviet Union and China with weapons, training, and supplies, things of a sort. And yes, South Vietnam was the government based or backed up by the United States as it sought to resist the communist control. So these are the different parties involved in the war. These are the presidents involved in the war. So we have President Dwight Eisenhower from 1953 to 1961, who supported the French in their fight against the Viet Minh early on, and the France withdrawal in 1954 began the U.S. involvement by sending military advisors and financial aid to South Vietnam. John F. Kennedy increased U.S. military advisors in South Vietnam from hundreds to over 16,000 and was backed up by the South Vietnamese government despite its corruption and instability. He approved a coup that led to the assassination of South Vietnam's President Ngo Dinh Diem and also set the presidency and stage for a deeper military involvement, although he didn't send any combat troops. Lyndon B. Johnson was president from 1963 to 1969, in which he escalated the war dramatically after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which he sent hundreds of thousands of U.S. combat troops to Vietnam, launching an operation called Rolling Thunder that sustained a bombing against the North Vietnam. He also helped face the anti-war protests at home and the rising U.S. casualties that occurred after. President Richard Nixon, from 1969 to 1974, introduced Vietnamization, which gradually withdrew the U.S. troops while training South Vietnamese to take over. It expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos in secret bombing campaigns, which later on reached a peace agreement in 1973, which we'll cover later. So this is the Da Nang Air Base. The Da Nang Air Base during the Vietnam War was stationed with the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. It was also used as a domestic and international flight route within the Southeast Asia area from 1951 to 1975. The airbase was majority U.S. and South Vietnamese military airfield control. It served as a key hub for launching air operations, including bombing missions, supply drops, etc. The base was heavily used by the U.S. Air Force and Marine Corps and also supported intelligence, reconnaissance, and transport missions. Due to the location, it was frequently targeted by enemy attacks. But here is the air base, and it was used primarily for the U.S. involvement. The Vietmins' use of guerrilla tactics include ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, the use of tunnel and traps, and effectively blending with civilian population. They also relied on their knowledge of the terrain and climate to their advantage. And here is a diagram of some of the tactics they used, such as underground shelter and marking points. The guerrilla tactics made it difficult for conventional armies like the French to win, leading to these tactics wore down enemy forces over time through surprise attacks and constant pressure. They also inspired future insurgent strategies, especially used by the Viet Cong with the U.S. troops. The successful guerrilla tactics helped turn the local support towards the Viet Minh, and it shifted the war from traditional battles to a long, drawn-out conflict that favored the insurgents. So these tactics were very abrupt and dangerous. So these two pictures just show the tragedies that were occurring during the Vietnam War. It caused deep and physical, emotional wounds for soldiers on all sides. Many faced constant danger from ambushes, booby traps, guerrilla attacks, and the unfamiliar environment they were in. Harsh jungle conditions, disease, and limited supplies also added to their physical strains. Emotionally, the soldiers felt or struggled with fear, guilt, and trauma, especially witnessing the death of comrades and civilians. In this photo here, we see a soldier carrying an elder Vietnamese lady to safety, which can cause a bunch of emotional strain to be in a war. The prolonged exposure to combat, often with no clear front line and constant tension and fear, led to soldiers questioning the meaning of the war. They also witnessed civilian casualties, which led to deep moral injury and guilt. So this picture was photographed by Nick Ut. In the photo, the backstory was his brother died before he got to capture a piece of history like this. So Nick Ut waited outside a building which was bombed, and he captured this photo, which really shows that the people of Vietnam suffered immense tragedies during the war. Millions of civilians were killed, injured, or displaced due to the bombings and massacres and the crossfire. Entire villages were destroyed and families were torn apart. The use of chemicals like from the one Agent Orange, which contained a highly toxic chemicals leading to long-term health problems and birth defects. Both the North and Vietnam people faced food shortages, poverty, fear, living under constant threat of violence, and the war left deep scars on the land and the people of the future generations. Protests against the Vietnam War grew rapidly, especially in America. Civilians, including students, activists, veterans, all rallied and protested, demanding to an end of the war. They opposed the draft, the civilian casualties, and the government dishonesty. War veterans also joined the movement, speaking out about the horrors they witnessed and experienced, and their voices added power and credibility that helped shift the public opinion against the war. In this picture here, we have a bunch of former soldiers walking down, parading, "We won't fight another rich man's war." Eventually, the Paris Peace Accords was signed on January 27th of 1973, officially ending the U.S. direct military involvement in the Vietnam War. The agreement resulted in a ceasefire, the withdrawal of American troops, and the return of U.S. prisoners from war. However, the agreement did not bring an end to the fighting in Vietnam, as the conflict continued until 1975, where the fall of Saigon occurred. So, turning back to our current time, we have learned from history. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., depicted here, is a powerful tribute to those who served and died in the Vietnam War. It consists of over the names of 58,000 fallen soldiers that symbolizes both loss and remembrance, with the visitors leaving personal items for the people who have passed. We also have one here in Sacramento called the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It is located at the Capitol Park, and it serves as a tribute to the Californians Vietnam War veterans. It features plaques and sculptures honoring the sacrifices of the soldiers from the state, and it aims to recognize the service and suffering of veterans, provided for reflection and remembrance. This has covered the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for your time.